My name is Lisa Van Reemdonk. I'm the Executive Director of Outreach, Partnerships, and Professional Learning here at the School of Public Affairs at CU Denver. I'm one of the people on the team that helps curate these First Friday breakfasts. So I'm going to start us off with our land acknowledgement today and then introduce you to our Chancellor. So first, we would like to acknowledge that we reside on the homelands of Indigenous peoples, and that's an important step in recognizing the history and the original stewards of these lands. Land acknowledgements, we know, must extend far beyond just words, and the United States has worked to erase the narratives of Indigenous peoples over time. Land acknowledgement statements like this can help us remind us of the history, the contributions, and the real sacrifices of Native people have made. So today we honor, acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute nations. This area, specifically the confluence of the Platte and Cherry Creek rivers, was the epicenter for trade, information sharing, planning for the future, community, family, ally building, as well as conducting healing ceremonies for over 45 Indigenous nations, including Lakota, Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, Shoshone, Paiute, Zuni, Hopi, and others. So we must recognize Indigenous peoples as the original stewards of this land. And as these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, remember the ties that the nations still have to their traditional homelands. Please let us acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory and pay our respect to the diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land. And let us also give thanks to all of the tribal nations and the ancestors of this place. We are celebrating our 50th birthday here, which comes with another land acknowledgement that is critically important for us as CU Denver and the Auraria campus to acknowledge, and that is we want to recognize that the community and the families of Auraria who lived and worked and worshiped here on the land that we inhabit as universities, and the decision to provide this sacred land in order to create a permanent home for the Community College of Denver, Metropolitan State University of Denver, and the University of Colorado Denver was a difficult one. So we do also want to honor the families of Auraria and their generous contribution, which has made this public campus of higher education and the work that we all do here possible and possible to benefit so many. So with that, I am thrilled to have Chancellor Michelle Marks with us today to help welcome you and celebrate a little bit of our 50th birthday. It is both the 50th anniversary of our university and of the School of Public Affairs, so we're the same age. And Michelle, thanks for sharing some welcome with us.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Dean Teske. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you to you and your team for organizing not only this morning's incredible panel and welcome panelists, but this event with regularity. I think it's one of the most important and one of the most popular events. It has been a hallmark of CU Denver. So thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to CU Denver this morning. These breakfasts are an incredible opportunity not only to gather and hear important perspectives, but also I was just watching the networking that was happening in this morning. It's so wonderful. I have been a part of these events, mostly virtual. When I came in the summer of 2020, these events pivoted virtual, and it's just, and they were also incredible content, but the power of the connection and the role that SPA has played in continuing to keep its alumni close is so meaningful and so important. So as Lisa mentioned, it is our 50th birthday. It was coming up on January 11th, 2023. We will celebrate 50 years of being an independent campus. The Colorado Constitution was modified 50 years ago to make that so. And because of that, Colorado now has access to a strong urban public research university that has grown over the last 50 years and has brought not only education to Denver and Colorado that serves an incredibly important and diverse population, but really continues to serve learners across the lifespan. So I think as many of you who I just met this morning have come to school or come back to school, we offer so many opportunities for people traditional age and older to take part in continual learning, which is really important. I'm proud that CU Denver is focusing on being a university for life, and our strategic plan has us thinking about what it means to shift thinking about education from something that people do between high school and a first job to something that as our population is living longer, is that something that people think about over the course of hopefully longer lifespans. We're also, as Lisa mentioned, celebrating SPA's 50th anniversary, which is incredibly exciting. SPA, I think even from its inception, as I've learned more and more about the important history of SPA, has always been a focus of learning on topics like housing, on topics like public safety, on topics like the environment, social equity. And these issues are still the issues of today. So the relevancy of this education, I think, has truly probably never been more important than right now. And SPA's programs, the faculty, our students, our alumni, many of whom are in the room today, are contributing all over Colorado, literally in every single corner of Colorado, to make a difference and strengthen our state. Our alumni are literally working every day to make Colorado work, and that is so important. It's not only the degree programs that SPA offers, but also the certificates in nonprofit management. Really, SPA has opportunities for people to come back and become that lifelong learning opportunity. And I think that is so important as careers are really shifting and people are no longer sticking around in one career for a lifetime, but really making changes and making later in life changes. And I'm so proud that SPA has opportunities to continue to support the development of learners at any stage in their lives. I'm excited for the panel. I wish I could stay, so I'm going to apologize and have to do something I don't like to do, which is welcome you and then run. But I know I'll be hearing about you because I know many in the room. So I hope you all have a wonderful morning and a wonderful time connecting. And thank you so much, Lisa and Paul.
All right, thanks, Chancellor Marks. So I'm going to start with just a little housekeeping and a quick overview here. So there's still breakfast, feel free to pop up. Thank you to our terrific caterer from Scratch Catering Services, Chef David in the back. I know, right? Terrific breakfast this morning. Thanks for being with us. One of our small local caterers that we like to use here for our first Friday breakfast. The restrooms are in the back if you need them. Now for questions, you may have received when you walked in a little sheet of white paper and a pen. Write your question down. My lovely colleagues, probably Dee Dee and Ellen and Joan, will be coming around when we get to your questions and collecting those. You always have more questions than we could possibly answer, so we're going to try to sort through them. We have a group of folks on Zoom as well, so one of the learnings we had in COVID is we can do these things hybrid. We'd love seeing you in person. More happy for those of you that are with us on Zoom. So you might hear me on a microphone just sort of restating something if we're not sure that it was heard. And then we save the recordings of these. So if you like what you heard and you'd like to pass it on to someone else, we'll have recordings on our website. So for those questions, be writing those down. If you're on Zoom, be posting them in the Q&A, and then they'll come up to me when we're ready to do that. I mentioned we do not get kicked out at 10 o'clock, so feel free to stay around for a little bit of time there if you like. So as you've heard, we are embracing our 50th anniversary theme. And I have to say, I'm on the team that thought that it was a great idea for us to do this theme of First Friday Breakfast as 50th anniversary. And then it became my turn to curate such a thing. And I realized, looking back 50 years on something like the entire nonprofit sector in Colorado and trying to look forward is a bit overwhelming. It is impossible for us to encapsulate an entire conversation. So I think consider today a little bit of a tidbit of a conversation, a lovely moment in our time to reflect back on those 50 years. My approach was to find, three smart, connected, and insightful panelists for you all, but just knowing that this is certainly not every voice that could be heard today, or every topic that we could get into, especially when we're thinking of the future and the past. So with all of that, I'm very eager to hear what our three folks have to say. So let's talk about who they are. So on my immediate right here, we have Patrick Horvath, who some of you may know. He is currently the administrative officer at the Center for Community Wealth Building, which works with people to build people-owned, inclusive, and sustainable Metro Denver economy that catalyzes prosperous and resilient communities free from racism and injustice. So doing a lot of cool work there, and spent a lot of his career here in Colorado at the Denver Foundation. So you may recognize the name and say, wait, what's going on, Patrick? So he'll be bringing both the, and actually all of our panelists will bring both the bit of the history and the forward thinking. So next to Patrick, we have Kelly Duncan, who joined the Community First Foundation as president and CEO in February of 2019. So again, a long career here in Colorado. She spent 11 years at the Colorado Health Foundation in Denver. So again, a big picture view of many of the nonprofits in especially in the health and social determinants of health field. And then is also very involved as a consultant to businesses and nonprofits and social impact startups, et cetera. Kelly, we always like to brag, Kelly's an alum. So welcome to the rest of you all alums. So we always like to brag a little bit there. And then lastly, we have Patrick Levine. Patrick is the president. Oh my gosh, Paul Levine. As someone with a very long last name that's difficult to pronounce, thank you for correcting me in the middle of this. Oh, well, great.
I usually get Peter.
Paul Levine, President and CEO of the Colorado Nonprofit Association. And the Colorado Nonprofit Association actually has been around for, is it 30 years now? 40 years, yeah. So again, stalwart for sure in our nonprofit world. He has spent 25 years in community building, resource development, political affairs, and nonprofit management, and has experience in education, came to the Nonprofit Association actually from Swallow Hill Music. So I love too that we have this diversity of the nonprofits that we've touched, even though there's 3 humans in front of us. So I'm gonna stop there with the introductions and let's start on some questions. So we have some prepared questions. One of the things I was thinking about when I was thinking about the thinking past is, you know, what's the first nonprofit that I ever knew of, that I ever knew existed? And I thought, I think it was probably the Girl Scouts. When as a kid, I was in Girl Scouts and I learned, oh, they're not a company, they're something different. And then probably Make-A-Wish after that with my siblings. So I'm curious if we could just go down the line here. Think for yourself, what was the first nonprofit that you knew existed? Perhaps it was a nonprofit that was helping your family in a time of need, or some volunteering you did. I'd love for us to go down the line and say,
With me, sure.
Yeah, what was the first one?
Excuse me. Hi and welcome everybody. So I grew up in Catholic schools and Catholic all the way through high school, and when I was thinking about this question, it was like, you know, it sort of was always in the water. I'm not sure I ever thought about. I probably had to think about what's a company rather than what's a nonprofit. But the idea that I suppose that comes to me is something through a charitable lens that helps people in need, that is associated with a religious congregation or a institution that helps people who are struggling by giving them something. So that was probably my first exposure to nonprofits.
Also grew up Catholic, but I didn't go to Catholic schools until high school. So I had to do what was called CCD on Saturday.
Yes.
Yep. And we got the white UNICEF box. I'm probably showing my age. I'm about the same age as Spa. And so got that white UNICEF box and realized that there were organizations out there that existed to help other people. And so it sort of spawned this giving. I took my allowance and would raise as much as I could to get in that UNICEF box to help kids who did not have as much as I was lucky to have. So that was my first exposure.
Paul?
Growing up in, oh my God, that sounds very loud. Is that loud or is it just me?
It's perfect.
It's perfect. We can hear you perfectly.
So growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, my mother was active on a number of boards. And one of the boards was the Tulsa Zoo. And on the weekends, I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I would help stock the concession stand at the Tulsa Zoo, right? And it was apparent. she was also on the board of Planned Parenthood. And so I would lead the front walk of Planned Parenthood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that was my early exposure.
Thanks. So let's get into our deeper questions. I appreciate the sort of reflections of how we landed in our knowledge about that. But what I'd like you to start and, take a little bit of time, each of you, maybe we'll start backwards, and Paul, if you want to get us going, is, talk a little bit about your vantage point on nonprofits, and what do you see as maybe one or two transitions or evolutions that nonprofits have gone through in the past few decades? Let's start there.
So my professional career, the first 15 years I spent running political campaigns and operations, congressional work in rural Arkansas and rural Alabama, and politics here in Colorado. And the second half of my professional career, I've spent at Mile High United Way at doing some ledge affairs for Red Cross at Aurora Public Schools Foundation at Swallow Hill. So a lot of the different verticals within the sector, and the Colorado Nonprofit Association is that perfect merger at the intersection between politics and advocacy, where we advocate on behalf of the entire sector. We lead on things that affect the entire sector, underlying conditions and communities. We support verticals in our lobbying efforts and public policy making. And we also are helping to create more capacity, trainings, education for the entire sector. We have 23,000 nonprofits in the state. We account for $40 billion of economic impact, about 10% of the state's economy. We have 330,000 direct and indirect workers in the state, more workers than ag and IT and mining all combined. And so we are this force. And I think one of the things that we do is we go and we listen and we hear what is affecting the entire sector, community by community. I think that what I'm excited to hear and learn from the other panelists and from others is how we've changed and evolved and developed. But I think one of the really interesting underlying factors, conditions of the entire sector is we've been built on the backs of women at a time when women either didn't work in the workplace, or the only jobs that they could get were in teaching or nursing. And we've never paid professional level salaries and wages. And we still have a majority of our workforce in the sector as women. And we are still working, fighting to evolve and develop into this, into really a professional service. And so I'm excited to continue to learn and explore from everybody, but I think that's one of the ways that the sector has been evolving.
Thanks. Kelly?
Yeah, so Community First Foundation, you may or may not know, we also run coloradogives.org online giving platform and Colorado Gives Day. So of course I have to talk about technology, and I think technology has changed a lot for nonprofits. And it's everything, not just from fundraising and that digital fundraising and being able to raise funds online, but it goes all the way into how they run their operations and how they understand the impact of their work. So that data collection, looking at, are we meeting the needs that we claim to meet? Do we have data to support that? So I think technology has really changed. I think also during COVID, we learned that without technology, we would not be able to reach all of the individuals we hope to reach through nonprofits. So I think it's both technology for fundraising, for how you run your operations, but also how you engage the community, whatever community it is you're purporting to serve through nonprofits. So I think that's been a huge change. It's changed our world. I know when I was born, we didn't have iPhones or any sort of mobile phones. My daughter asked me the other day, well, when did you get your first phone? I was like 23 because they didn't exist. So I think technology has just changed the world, but it's also really changed the way nonprofits operate. I think the other thing is, at least in the last several years, I've seen this real focus for nonprofits that are client serving to focus on the client and think of that client as a business would think of a customer. What are their needs? What are their wants? How do they want to be approached? How do they want to be served? And so it's everything from being more culturally appropriate, making sure you have staff that look like and talk like the population that you're serving to changing the way that they do their work. So I'll use Food Bank of the Rockies as an example. They recognized that they just had boxes of food and they were giving out boxes of food to individuals. Well, sometimes those boxes of food were not being used because for certain populations, canned vegetables are absolutely foreign. They would never use canned vegetables. That's not how they cook. That's not how they eat. So they did very deep research to understand who are we serving and what are the foods that they eat. And then they came up with culturally appropriate food boxes to make sure that the clients they were serving were getting food that they could actually use and eat and felt valued in the receipt of that food. So thinking of who you're serving, not as that noblesse oblige, I'm giving to you, you should be thankful, but I'm here to serve you. And I want to serve you in a way that honors you and gives you the dignity you deserve as an individual. So I've seen that shift as well.
Right. Well, as Lisa mentioned, I'm sort of wearing a couple different hats here, and a number of us have been through both parts of the sector, the philanthropic side and the nonprofit side. But I spent 13 years at the beginning of my career as an attorney working with single adults experiencing homelessness in the streets of New York City, doing civil legal services work with them, and then spent 21 years at the Denver Foundation running the Strength in the Neighborhoods program, and also as the director of economic opportunity, working on issues involving access to economic opportunity for people who are disadvantaged or communities that have been sort of left behind. So I've seen a lot of trends develop, and as I think about what's changed in the field, one thing that I really am aware of, especially through my role at the Denver Foundation, is that the shift from a lot of philanthropic funders in particular to, not the shift, the opening of their assets in ways that go beyond their grant making. So this is sometimes called impact investing. It's a confusing thing for a lot of nonprofits because what they need is unrestricted grant dollars. The more unrestricted, the better. And what they're being told by a lot of foundations is, we want to give you a loan. We'll give you a grant, but we really want to give you a loan. And it's like, well, we don't need a loan. How are we going to pay back a loan? So there's this sector of the nonprofit sector, which has the ability because they have cash flow, to take advantage of that. And if you can take advantage of it, it opens up a whole nother tier of assets. The grant making budgets for foundations are 5% of the value of their endowment every year. If they start making loans to the nonprofit sector, they're opening up hundreds of millions of dollars. Colorado Health Foundation had $1 billion+ budget, endowment. So, you can get at a lot more assets if you can think about how to use them. But I think a lot of nonprofits find that frustrating because it's only a slice of the nonprofit sector that can take advantage of that. And then the other trend that I've really noticed, and Kelly kind of referenced it, is the shift towards a focus on racial equity within the sector, both within the foundations that are giving money into the sector and within the organizations themselves. And this is long overdue, but what it's led to is a challenge for a lot of nonprofits that are white-led to understand that that their leadership at all levels, board, staff, et cetera, have to reflect the communities that they serve. They have to be representative. Representation matters. And so that shift in what funders are asking for and how nonprofits are responding is also, I think, a source of frustration for some, especially white-led nonprofits, as they try to navigate this space, which starts with a question of, what is the racial background of your top leadership? And then we go on to think about how we can fund you. So that's a big trend that's happened recently, and it's accelerated, of course, since the summer of 2020 and our latest racial reckoning. And I don't see that changing. I think that's really that trend is going to continue rolling forward.
I feel like this is proof. We could have a semester-long panel on each one of these topics. So thanks for giving us just a drop. One of the things coming here about 15 years ago was my recognition of the uniqueness of Colorado. And so it certainly extends to our nonprofit space as well. And I would love your reflections on what do you see as unique about the nonprofit landscape in Colorado? And Kelly, from your vantage point, I would love would you mind starting this one and then we'll see?
Yeah, I don't want to steal Patrick's because we knew what we were both going to answer. But when I think about the uniqueness, I think we actually work together in Colorado. Now, I will acknowledge we have a little co-opetition. So you've got cooperation and a little bit of competition. It's not pure on either side. But I do think that nonprofits and foundations work together to solve problems. And you can see that across the board. I'll give you an example from my perspective. So, and it goes to the impact investing. As we were all responding to COVID, many foundations were upping their grant budgets, giving more money to nonprofits. A lot of them started to change. I'm proud to say we had been doing this and we continue to do it, giving that unrestricted general operating, recognizing that a nonprofit, they know how to run their budget. I don't know how to run their budget. I'm not doing senior services. So giving them the money and allowing them to use it how they see fit to meet the goals that you agreed upon meeting. So we were giving a lot of money to nonprofits through grants, but we recognized that there was an opportunity to make loans. So the Denver Foundation, Rose Community Foundation, Community First Foundation were the largest community foundations in the metro area. We had never jointly worked on any project together, but we came together and we created the Metro Denver Loan Fund. And its purpose was to help nonprofits who had suffered during COVID. We saw their revenues drop, or they actually didn't have revenue, or they were getting money from the federal government, but it was going to come in arrears. So they had to build up all this infrastructure without the money. And we're sort of in that rock and a hard place. So we created the Metro Denver Loan Fund. We have distributed, I believe it's been 3 million that have gone out in loans. When they get paid back, we will then give those out in loans again. And the thought was, this is not to replace your grant funding. There is a place for grant funding, and we don't want you to take a loan when you need a grant. But there's also opportunities for loans for very specific purposes. And for some nonprofits, especially those who couldn't get a loan in the typical capital markets, they could get a loan from us, build their credit worthiness so that they understand how a capital stack might work for big projects. And then they build up that credit worthiness so that they could be eligible for loans in the private market. Now, in the private market, they're not going to want a loan because it's going to cost a whole lot more. And we can do it on a subsidized rate. So that's one thing I see in Colorado, that nonprofits and foundations will come together to actually try to solve problems and work jointly so that you could have a bigger impact.
I like the example too. We talk about this a lot. Oh, we're so collaborative. It was something that I definitely learned when I first got here, but the really clear example and also, you know, that the collaboration continues, right? In your story, you mentioned you hadn't all worked together in this way before. So we are collaborative and we are continuing to figure out how to be collaborative differently. So thanks for
And
that.
we ask, as foundations, we're constantly asking nonprofits to be collaborative. So we need to walk the walk as much as we talk the talk.
I'm
So
annoying sometimes.
yeah, yes. We could do a whole panel on how annoying foundations are. if you want.
We maybe have before. Thanks for that. And so Patrick and Paul, any thoughts on this question of the uniqueness of Colorado?
So, you know, the numbers are a little bit old, but they probably haven't changed a whole lot. We're 5th in the country in terms of net income per capita, 32nd in the country in terms of charitable giving per capita. Tabor has put all of the pressures, the downward pressures on our state budgets. So the demand is incredible. The need is great. And as nonprofits are asked to do more and more, the collaborative spirit is so critical, not just with foundations, but with corporations. And we've seen, you know, all the trends around CSR and ESG with corporate America and how we're all starting to figure out how do we work more together. But that collaborative spirit, that's absolutely it.
So corporate social responsibility, what was the other?
Yeah,
ESG.
ESG, sorry, environmental, social, and governance mindsets.
Yeah.
you.
Definitely some changes in that world and the permeability of what we think is the nonprofit sector, right? And who's giving and why, and who's seeing the third bottom line.
So I'm gonna go last year, but you know, Lisa asked us these questions in
And
advance.
he did say it.
And I was the only one who answered this question, and I said what they just said. So,
It's true.
but it's interesting because I come from a long nonprofit experience in New York, where I did a lot of fundraising and also worked as an attorney, et cetera. And it's a very competitive environment. There's a lot more funding. There's a niche for everything. My organization called the Urban Justice Center was focused on single adults experiencing homelessness on the streets of the city. There was another organization, Legal Aid Society, that had a family legal services program. There was a children's legal services program. We developed a gay and lesbian street kids program. So there was lots of competition and everybody segmenting that market and going after different sources of funding. And I got to Colorado and it was just a whole different situation. And an example I can give, you know, similar to Kelly, because I think these things are best explained through examples. The last time I was on this stage. I think there actually was a stage. It was with a group called Mile High Connects, which I was part of for many years when I was at the Denver Foundation. And that grew out of the fact that we were putting $7.6 billion into the fast tracks, for those of you old enough to remember fast track, which created the light rail system that runs through most of the metro region. That wasn't being done with any thought about how it would affect the communities it was going through and how they could be involved and how it could advance equity in our community. It was just thought of as a commuter rail solution. And so a group of nonprofits and foundations got together at the invitation of an outside foundation, the Ford Foundation, to think about how we could collaboratively invest in ensuring that these dollars were spent in ways that advanced equity in our communities. That collaborative, which became called Mile High Connects, involved 13 or 14 foundations, 8 or 9 nonprofits, including every community organizing group in the Front Range. And it had a major impact in the way that those communities grew around their transit nodes. Unfortunately, not unfortunately, it had a lifespan. It ended this past June, but that collaborative existed for 11 years, and the foundations stayed at the table the whole time, gave annual operating grants to make it work. They supported the community organizing groups and the nonprofits that were part of that. And it was a really great example of how you can come together over a period of time, not just to meet an emergent need, but to meet a need that's going to involve massive amounts of money and infrastructure development over a long period of time, and you can bend the curve by working together.
Thanks for that. You're leading right into another thing that we had talked about sharing today, and that is thinking about what is the major impact that nonprofits have had in Colorado, or a particular nonprofit. And so we've sort of parlayed into this collaboration, but then what a major impact, right? In our transportation system in the metro area. Any other examples that you all have of a major impact that a nonprofit or the sector has had in Colorado?
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I think we've had, you have a lot of nonprofits and foundations who have stepped up to pass legislation or to put initiatives on the ballot that have had huge impact. So the Family Medical Leave Act that was passed, and businesses are getting everything in place and starting to fund it this year so that it goes into place in 2024. That was all led by foundations and nonprofits who wanted to make sure that all workers had the opportunity for family medical leave. I think if you look, if you're old enough to remember Ref C&D, when that was passed, that was a huge coalition. It wasn't just nonprofits and foundations, but they certainly played a key role in getting that passed to sort of make some changes to taper the taxpayer bill of rights that allowed us to continue to fund infrastructure and critical needs in the state. And then the last one I wanted to mention was SCFD. We are one of the only places in the country that has taxing revenue that goes to our cultural facilities. And that was all led by nonprofits. So those are huge, lasting changes that nonprofits have had in Colorado.
Just from my Swallow Hill background, I'm just going to give a little bit more color on SCFD
Please.
because it's so critical in 1988 when our infrastructure of arts and culture was just in a state of decay. And this is 1 cent on every $10 sales tax that has created a pot of money every year, about $65–70 million just for our 7-county area. That's funded out to 300 different arts and cultural organizations that's truly driving economic development in this magical way. And to put that into perspective, the NEA has a pot of money, I think maybe $80 or $90 million nationally in discretionary funding for the entire country. And so for this pot of $70 million for our 7-county area, it's a tremendous benefit. So absolutely.
As a bit of a governance nerd, I'll just add the governance, right, of SCFD is really interesting and unique, and how, across the state, they're governed. So great examples.
Well, and sitting here at this wonderful institution and across the street from 2 other wonderful institutions that so much serve the educational needs of our community. One that I would like to point out is the Colorado Asset Act, which I'm going to have to look here, stands for Advancing Students for a Stronger Economy Tomorrow. It was passed in 2013, but it took 10 years to pass. The Asset Act allows undocumented students to get in-state tuition to go to schools like this if they had to go and pay private rates, they would not be able to go to college. And so by waiving that requirement of being a document citizen, they opened up the opportunity to get a college education to thousands of students across the Front Range, across the state. It was a statewide bill, obviously. That legislation was introduced the first time in 2003. It took 10 years to pass the legislature. There was a whole coalition, every community organizing group in the Front Range, congregations, legislators, parents, students, immigrants, advocating, lobbying. Every year it would get shot down in committee. It didn't make it out of committee the first few years. Then it made it to the floor and somebody changed their mind at the last minute and knocked it out. And finally in 2013 it passed. And so now we are 9 years into this opportunity for students to achieve their dreams for themselves by being able to afford to go to college. And that was a coalition of nonprofits that passed that legislation. It's interesting that we've all focused on legislation. You know, there is an article I read when I was first getting involved in philanthropy. I think the title was The Flea and the Elephant. And it was by a philanthropic leader in the San Francisco area who talked about the extent to which philanthropy was a flea on the butt of an elephant, and the elephant was the government. That's where the money is. And to think that, as Paul was referencing, that we can solve the problems that government abdicates through philanthropic support or charitable support is laughable. You have to bend things at the legislature in order to really make a difference. And I think we've all given examples of how legislative support can move dollars that philanthropy can't touch.
And I want to give one more example of how nonprofits in Colorado have actually taken legislation from the federal government and made it work in Colorado. So we all talked about the uniqueness of Colorado is our nonprofit sector works together. So there's something called federally qualified health centers, which are federally funded health centers who serve individuals who are either uninsured or publicly insured on Medicaid or the Child Health Plan Plus. And in most states, you can have a federally qualified health center on one corner run by one organization and another federally qualified health center run by another organization 2 blocks away. And you can imagine that's not terribly efficient. You're kind of competing for clients. You have a ton of overhead. What we've done in Colorado is all of the organizations that run federally qualified health centers have carved out regions for themselves. And they serve those regions and then they work collaboratively to make sure that they are being as efficient as possible to serve as many people as need to be served. So I think that's another great example of how we played to our uniqueness and our ability to work together for the benefit of individuals who need that primary care.
One of the things you're also making me think of is we're talking about this in the legislation space and just, you know, my years here, the evolution I saw in health and public health advocacy specifically is not just a coalition of the community organizing advocates or just a coalition or just one of our sort of policy shops going to the state legislature and making a pitch. But I've seen an evolution, especially in the health space, of let's all come together and tell the individual story that we know because we are providing direct services to this person. And then also give the policy analysis of what's happening across the country and what might work here in Colorado. And also the, you know, the community organizers who work with physicians or other health professionals. And to me, that multi-level dynamic and the requirement then that, you know, organizations that don't necessarily do the same work in figuring out who's got the right role. That's been a neat evolution that I've watched too in the legislation sort of advocacy realm. Okay, so we're going to stop for a minute because I wanted to do some fun facts. And so I asked everyone to bring just like, what's a fun fact about, so it might be something unique or just a fun fact about the Colorado nonprofit world. So who wants to start with our fun facts?
Paul already said mine, which I took from the Colorado Nonprofit Association website, so not surprising.
What was the fact?
The fact that we have $40 billion influence on the state economy through the nonprofit sector, and that 10% of our workforce, 330,000 people in the state of Colorado are employed in the nonprofit sector, and that is a huge impact. And I don't think a lot of people think of it. They think, oh, these little charities that are doing, you know, they're helping people who are, you know, struggling. It is a major force in the state, and we have supported it, but also we've ceded a lot of ground to it, that it shouldn't have to do at the level, well, it should be better resourced to do the work that it's doing.
And I'll just name, Paul, your original comment about what that means in salaries. you know, as a field, as an industry, you know, what does that mean for a tenth of our population to be in the space that you described to begin with?
What does it mean? I was.
No, that's not really a question.
I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to answer that.
For all of us to ponder. Okay, what other fun facts do we have?
I don't know if it's a fact, but when I think about the nonprofit sector, I think about the creation of social capital. I think about bringing people together in ways that the private sector doesn't, that the public sector doesn't. That the nonprofit sector is where people come to volunteer, they come to serve, they come to be part of community. I think that building and that creation of social capital is just a critical part of our lives.
Yeah.
Okay, so this will feel a little bit, we're going to go back to Colorado Gives. So Community First Foundation, I get no credit for this. I was not there when this started. But in 2007, Community First Foundation started an online giving platform called Giving First. Giving First, they recognized, so the fun fact is in 2007, that was the year the very first iPhone came out. So they were creating an online giving platform where people were not even shopping online, let alone donating online. And they had the prescience to think, okay, this is all going to move forward. And all of these nonprofits are going to have to create this infrastructure to do online donations. Let's create it for them and make it easy for them to do that. So in 2007, they created Giving First. And then in 2009, they used Giving First for the very first Colorado Gives Day. So it came before Giving Tuesday. And the first year, the goal was to raise $1 million, and they raised $8 million. And it's grown ever since. Last year, $55 million to support Colorado nonprofits on one day.
As I was thinking about this one too, I was looking back and I did not know this, but the United Way was originally
Yeah.
founded. Some of you are nodding your heads, oh, that you knew that. The United Way was originally founded in Denver in 1887. So we are the sort of the original home.
And I love this fact. If you played Monopoly and you've landed on Community Chest, that was the original name of United Way.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All
I
right.
give that.
So that was our fun. Folks in the room.
Thank you.
I love it. So that was our fun fact break. Thanks for that. Well, let's start moving ourselves into the future. And I would love to reflect a little bit on what is no longer true. So thinking back to earlier in your career, what were you told was a quote unquote truth of nonprofits that is no longer true, or we're headed towards it not being true? Paul, do you want to start?
No.
Okay.
I'll start.
Go.
Yeah. So when I first started, it was sort of beat into your head, never more than 15% on overhead or administration. Don't pay for overhead or administration. Don't do it. And I think that I no longer believe that to be true. I think nonprofits are charged to solve the most difficult problems in our society, or to take advantage of the most important opportunities that we could pursue as a society. We want the very best people solving those problems, taking advantage of those opportunities, and we should pay them livable or more wages in order to do that. And that means you're going to have some administration. You're going to have to actually pay salaries. You're going to have to pay marketing so people know about it and can support the organization to provide those services. So that's the myth that was sort of, I think, well, we haven't fully debunked it, but I hope we get to debunking it, that good nonprofits, like good businesses or any good organization, you need infrastructure for it to run.
And I would say it's almost a corollary to that. It was like absolutely the water we were swimming in when I first started in the philanthropic world over 20 years ago, that nonprofits will be more successful if they're run more like businesses. I found it frustrating at the time. I still find it frustrating, and I think it's largely been debunked. That the groups that, there are certainly good ways to use data, as Kelly has described, and that is something that might come from business. It's not just a matter of, spreading your whatever resources you have around to people who are, on the streets or suffering from hunger. You actually have to know if it's having an impact. I certainly agree with that. But this notion that if you kind of follow the Harvard Business School case study model, you will run a much more successful nonprofit. There's just no truth to that. And so there's so many things that go on in a nonprofit leaders and a nonprofit boards and a nonprofit staff's world that have nothing to do with the for-profit model, which is focused on making money. I mean, that's why it exists, right? That's capitalism. You have a different set of goals. And so efficiencies and reducing labor costs and all of the things that go into improving your bottom line, increasing value for shareholders, fine. That's not our sector. And to try to think that it is and to bend ourselves into some of those strategies and ways of working has caused enormous pain and harm in the sector. So let's set that aside.
Any no longer truths inspiring you over there, Paul?
No, I mean, I 100% agree with Kelly on debunking the overhead myth. So absolutely. No, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. I want to name, I mean, Mile High connects that story, Patrick, too, right? This idea that we would say, well, nonprofits aren't supposed to exist forever, right? Like, let's serve our mission, do it well, and then we could close. But that doesn't really happen, but it does, right? I do think that that's something that's starting to become a question of like, are we still serving our mission well enough? Are we the only one? Should we merge up with another organization? Should we move? And we've seen some of that, the moving around, and that story is an example of our work here is done. It's okay for us to close up shop. Great. So continuing to move into the future, I would love to just talk a little more about some future trends. So what kinds of things are you all thinking about, hearing nationally? What are some future trends?
I don't want to.
Go ahead.
You all go.
Well, one that has been referenced already, and I think is worth exploring some more, is the increasing focus within the nonprofit workforce on quality of life and compensation. And it's something that Paul's has already spoken about, and Kelly as well. But we're in a situation right now where it's very difficult for people, and Lisa said that the highest concentration of folks in SPA is in the nonprofit management sector. It's very difficult to think about young people, especially Gen Z folks coming into the sector, if they can't actually buy a house. Rents and costs of housing are going sky high in Denver. Inflation, all of the things that are putting pressure on the regular workforce, and we have a labor shortage as well, are also putting pressure on the nonprofit sector. So I think that as we think about the sector going forward, we're going to have to figure out ways to compensate people fairly and to give them a quality of life that matches the quality of life that they might have in other places. The old saw that Paul referenced is that you do this because you're passionate, or in the case of the women domination, the fact that women were represented the sector was because they didn't need to have a job. That is no longer true. We have a very professional workforce. We have groups like SPA training that workforce, and we have to be able to compensate them. And Kelly's referenced this as well from her foundation's point of view. And I was thinking about this a lot at the Denver Foundation. Foundations and the philanthropic support have to support paying people a living wage. And right now, when I first was coming to Denver and looking for jobs here, the only places that you could earn a decent salary were at the very largest nonprofits. And yet the very smallest nonprofits are sometimes doing the most important work and are most deeply connected to the community. And especially as we have a younger workforce, which frankly isn't going to put up with this. They've shown their predilection for moving jobs every couple of years. If we want to build strength within the sector by having people come and stay and devote their passion over time so they gain that experience and become really leaders in their field, we're going to have to figure out ways to reduce their burnout by paying them better and by giving them better quality of life. So I think that's something the sector really has to take a look at.
And Paul, that's something that, the Colorado Nonprofit Association for a long time has invested in, the salary survey. And I love if you haven't seen the salary survey, you should pay for it and get it.
It comes out every 2 years. It'll come out next fall.
Next fall. Because it goes deeply into the topic sectors, right? You can look at what is someone at a large nonprofit in the health sector make, what is someone in a small nonprofit in animal welfare. And you just really get an enormous view of this challenge and how it's not uniform actually across, the art sector as well. It's just different. Yeah. Other big trends?
Feeding into the whole theme of burnout is the decay of civility and how that affects our nonprofit workers on the front lines, whether it's in ticket booths for our arts and cultural organizations, or you name it, in food pantries. We see it everywhere that the clients that we serve have shorter fuses, right? Whether it's because of COVID or all of these existential issues that we're all facing with. But that actually creates trauma for our workforce, which it only accelerates the burnout factor. It only makes the work harder. And so I see that actually as a thing that we should be paying attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think trends, I'll go back to technology. We can't ignore technology and it's only going to continue to accelerate. And I think oftentimes because of the administrative overhead myth and what people are willing to invest in or not invest in with nonprofits, they're going to be behind the curve. And you're going to start to see some nonprofits not be able to keep up because they haven't been able to invest in the technology that will get them where they need to be to both reach donors, but more importantly, to reach the clients they need to reach and be able to support what's working and what's not working. So I think that's a trend, having to be able to invest in those, not just the technology, but the business processes that allow you to take advantage of that technology. And I think a lot of times they're sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and they just can't invest in that infrastructure to take advantage of it. I think stability is another one, 100%. I also think in terms of workforce, we have a declining population. I know we consistently hear we have more people moving to Colorado. We've got more people moving to Colorado. Our population is declining, and we may not have enough individuals to fill every job that we have, which is going to make technology even more important in how we are going to continue to serve the most vulnerable among us. So I think thinking about workforce, what we pay, how we train, how we attract, and how we augment that with some technology is going to be critically important in the future.
Well, and it just occurred to me, it's something else that I've been thinking about a little bit. It's a short-term trend, but I think it's something looming on the horizon that to keep an eye on, is that we had the enormous good fortune, not good fortune. We had the enormous opportunity presented by good legislation, from my point of view, in Congress to have a lot of money flowing into states through the American Recovery Plan Act. That money has largely in Colorado been devolved into nonprofits, and as a result have caused this spike in our ability to meet the needs that the state is trying to meet through the nonprofit community, which they have contracted out rather than building their own workforce. On the other hand, it's caused us to build our workforce, and that money is going to go away pretty soon. So I know, for instance, at the Center for Community Wealth Building, where I live right now, participating in Colorado Gives Day, don't forget, next Tuesday, we're hiring several folks because there are programs being set up by the state, by Office of Economic Development and International Trade to focus on some of the issues on worker ownership that we are specialized in and we're experts at. And we're going to hire, we hired one more, we're going to probably hire 2 more staff. In 2 years, that money is going to be spent out. So what are we going to do with those 3 staff? The work is still going to be really important. The need is still going to be really important. The cutting edge work of creating worker-owned nonprofits is still going to be critical for our economics transition. But those ARPA dollars are going to be gone. So something to think about as well. If I were still in the foundation community, I'd be puzzling over that.
I'll only tack on because that gap in federal funding that's going to go away, that federal funding may have in fact masked structural deficiencies that during COVID weren't addressed. Expenses weren't in fact downsized appropriately. You know, we were kind of all living large, and now we unmask ourselves and we say, oh my God, we're in a deeper hole than we thought.
The other thing I've been thinking about a lot is, as you look at younger generations, they're not willing to separate their values from their work. They consistently tell us that they're willing to move jobs. They want to put their values to work in their profession. And you're starting to see businesses keep that in mind as they develop employee giving programs or corporate social responsibility programs. And what are the opportunities for nonprofits and the nonprofit workforce to take advantage of that trend in people wanting to live more meaningful lives?
Yeah.
And then I think another trend, and we have people watching in virtually, is there's some research that's being published in short order that talks about it takes 17 virtual connections to build the same amount of trust that one in-person connection will build. And so how does that look in the future as we build a workforce that wants to work remotely, that how to, you know, in some ways, the Colorado Nonprofit Association is a better organization because of Zoom, because of this technology, because we can get to the entire state like that. But what's the trade-off and how do we advance? So I think we're at the very beginning of this social experiment.
And how, that makes me think too, how are we giving ourselves the time? I mean, we talk now that we don't even give ourselves the time to really develop collaborative relationships. You know, we've got some stories of how that's worked, but that takes time. And now what you're describing is even more time to develop the trust and relationships in order to be able to move forward with collaborative work more quickly and even to just get along. Yeah. That's a lot of future trends.
We've got 50 years, right?
Yeah, right. 50 years forward too, right? So I want us to just take a moment around, you know, we critique because we care, critique because we love and we want the sector and the professionals in it to improve. What are nonprofits just not getting right yet? So with that idea of like, what do we still need to be working on?
One of the things, and I'm going to separate it from nonprofits to people who have a passion. So I think we consistently and still see people with a passion say, I'm going to create a nonprofit. Please don't. Please take that passion and find a nonprofit that you can work with to accomplish that goal. And so I think that is something we're still not getting right. And I think we've talked a lot about in the philanthropic sector, mergers, there's too many nonprofits, they've got to merge. Merger has to be a strategic plan, not a strategic, it has to be a strategy to achieve a goal. It's not the end in of itself. So we've got to stop thinking about merger as the goal. The goal is how do we do more with what we've got or with less to serve more people, to provide more to the community. And I think we haven't really explored shared services in a way that could be beneficial. It doesn't mean a full merger, but there's ways to share services and share some of that overhead that everyone needs to do in a way that benefits all nonprofits. We see it all the time. So I will admit, Colorado Gives platform has been clunky in the past. We have a new platform, it's way better. We just launched it this year and we worked really hard. It's like 6 times more expensive than it was, but we figured out a way to still make it free to every nonprofit. It does pretty much everything that any other fundraising platform will do for a nonprofit, and it's free, 0 cost. And we still have nonprofits who will on Giving Tuesday use a different platform rather than Colorado Gives Day, where it's not only free, but it gets you a boost because it counts towards Colorado Gives Day. So I think it's just that, and I'm not saying they all need to go on Colorado Gives. That's not what I'm saying, but it's just an example of how really exploring how we can do more with what we've currently got.
Paul, this makes me think of the collaborative space that you all created among some of the nonprofit sector supporters. Do you want to talk just briefly about that? Do you mind?
You're talking about 789 Sherman Street, how there's 6 nonprofits all sharing one space. And it's great in theory. And in fact, the collaborative is, you know, we are trying to figure out what's the future. Our lease expires after 12 years this next June. And has the experiment worked? And what does it look like in the future, especially with the remote work options that are going on? So I would throw that out there. What are we not getting right? I think risk capital, we don't necessarily get right yet. We have boards of directors, folks from the private sector that take risks all the time in their businesses. And then they come onto the boards of nonprofits and they go, well, we need to steward this money conservatively. We need to not take that risk. So I think that's one. As businesses are trying to become a little bit more like nonprofits, right, through the corporate social responsibility lens, how do nonprofits become a little bit more like businesses? So I'll push back a little bit to say, you know, I think this is where we can, you know, increase salaries. We can treat people right, like the professionals they are. But oftentimes we bring the passion to the sector, but not the business acumen to the sector. And so I think how do we really do some of that? And then I don't know. I let 1,000 flowers bloom. I mean, the marketplace is going to flesh it out. So if you want to do a nonprofit, create a nonprofit. I know, right? This is, right? Let 1,000 flowers, the marketplace is going to figure it out because it could be that in fact, you got the next best thing and doing it yourself is going to take that idea further, farther
Fair
than a
enough. Yep.
collaboration.
I would say from my time working in philanthropy, I get that. And we also had a lot of people coming to all of our sort of 101 sessions to learn about how to apply to the Denver Foundation, who had ideas for standalone one-off nonprofits that just weren't fundable. And
Yeah.
that's not because we didn't want to take risks. It's because it was that person's passion. And even in our Strength in Neighborhoods program, we required, which gave grants of up to $5,000 to groups of people and communities without any regard to their nonprofit status. We figured it all out on the back end. You still needed 3 or more people in your neighborhood who are not related to each other to have an idea for something that you wanted to improve your community. So that there is some notion of let's find out if anyone else is interested in the great idea that you have, and then let's talk about whether it's fundable or not. But one of the things I want to mention applies to a sort of a narrow but very important part of the sector, and that is very large institutions. And I think very large institutions, especially those that are anchored in place, we call them anchor institutions, kind of like UCD, have not thought very progressively in the Denver region. They're starting to, about how they can use all of their resources to benefit the communities in which they're located, and frankly, to achieve their mission. Most of these institutions are in the higher ed space or the healthcare space. They're never going to leave their communities. Think about University of Denver, Auraria campus, Regis, Anschutz Medical Center, et cetera. They're not going to pick up and leave. Although I guess Anschutz sort of was an example of picking up and leaving. But now that they're there, they're not going to leave. How can they use their procurement dollars, their hiring practices, and their investment, because they all have foundations, to support the communities that they're in? By investing in affordable housing, by hiring and training from their local communities when those communities are struggling to get good jobs for their folks, and by investing in people like David, who are small businesses that don't have easy access to large institutions. UCD has changed the way it hires caterers for these events so that small businesses can have a foot in the door. We've been doing all sorts of, we've been in the Center for Community Wealth Building, work with caterers to help them crack into large institutions that spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on catering every year, much of it going to Panera. What do we do to help the immigrant caterers who have amazing food, way different and better than Panera, to get into the door so that they can, when they have their lunch, Anschutz has a lunch for its residents every Tuesday. I mean, imagine how many residents there are at the Anschutz campus. And they were consistently hiring the same caterer every single time. And it was a national caterer who could answer on a dime, give them what they need, had a fair price. Well, so we need to help those small businesses understand what it takes to answer on a dime, have a fair price, give a good menu, and then they can start to compete for those contracts. But the institutions have to change the way they think about advancing their mission through their business practices, not just through their healthcare services or their education services.
That actually answers one of the questions that one of our audience members had
Yep.
about what could, universities and colleges specifically do. I want to move us a little bit to some questions because I've got a bunch of them and a couple of ones that I want to try to cover. We haven't gone here and I'd love to hear if you've got some thoughts. So unprepared question. What has been the biggest challenge of the division in the political climate for nonprofits? Any thoughts there? Anything come to mind?
Oh,
Go ahead.
in some ways, I think the nonprofit sector has actually fared fairly well, even with the political divisions. Both sides of the aisle are supportive of communities, maybe for different reasons. But within their communities, there's still what I see as support for the sector.
I absolutely agree. And I think there is a desire to serve the community and a fear that they're going to say or do something wrong that is going to have backlash that prevents them from fulfilling their mission. And so I think in some cases they've retreated and they haven't been as vocal or as engaging with the community as they may have been in the past, because they're afraid they're going to get it wrong for one side or the other and alienate their organization from donors or supporters.
It's a tough question. I do think we've been a little bit insulated. One example that comes to mind, something that we're working on right now with a whole bunch of like 12 other organizations, is in response to an issue that came out of the summer of 2020, when the Denver Metro Chamber was approached by a lot of its large institutional members, large businesses in the community, to say, look, we're making all these pledges to support Black-owned businesses, a person of color, BIPOC-owned, Black, Indigenous people of color-owned businesses, but we don't know where they are. We want to walk our talk, because people were making a lot of empty promises, believe me. Can you help us figure that out? And so this coalition came together and created something called shopbipoc.com. It's up right now, to match interested consumers who want to match their kind of interest in seeing a more racially equitable business community with business owners that fit that sort of description. And my concern as it's launching is that we're going to get pushback from white business owners who are going to say, what do you mean you're trying to steer people to businesses owned by people of color? What about white business owners? And it's a sort of failure to understand the way our system has privileged white business owners for so many years, and access to capital and markets and marketing. And so I do think that, and it's happened, the federal government announced a special program, the USDA, for Black farmers who have been shut out of access to USDA resources for generations. And it was immediately challenged in court by some white farmers in the Pacific Northwest, and the entire program was stopped by a federal judge. So that's a challenge in this society, because you can't say, look at the history, look at the way our system works to oppress certain people, without the other side coming back and saying, now you're discriminating against white people. So I think that's a tension we're going to continue to have to deal with because of this sharp division in our society.
It's a good question. I also think about what could be and is the role of nonprofits and universities, et cetera, in trying to get us curious about each other again, right? And to, I don't want to say bridge the divide, but really to embody that curiosity instead of the reactiveness that a lot of us feel. Like, let's own that too. We are all part of the divide. Yeah. Terrific question. So I want to land us on the hopes and dreams questions. We have just a couple of more minutes. Thinking forward, let's leave with some forward thinking, 10, 20 years. What's one thing that you hope that we can make major progress on in the nonprofit realm? And I've asked these folks to kind of stick it a little bit to the sector itself rather than affordable housing. Let's make some progress there. For the sector, what are your hopes and dreams?
The hope is that people entering the workforce don't say, well, we can go into the private sector and make money, or we can go into the nonprofit sector and live our passion, right? That they go, you know what, we can go into the nonprofit sector and make a living and feed our family and do something incredible for the community.
We're not going to take yours. You get to go.
Thank you, Kelly. So I have to, I've been thinking about this a lot because of these dual roles, having left philanthropy very recently and now being back in the sector in a very kind of community-based organization. I hope, my hope and dream is that in the next 20 years, we will deal honestly with the issues of structural racism in our society and in our sector. And I thought about this a lot when I was in philanthropy. And now, of course, I'm out there looking for money again as a nonprofit person. But the philanthropic sector is built on white surplus wealth being given to organizations which are trying to solve problems caused by the very system that allowed that wealth to accumulate. And it's a charity-based model that is not dealing with the honest issues of the system that got us there. And until we can think honestly about reparations, and reparations means all sorts of things, but the philanthropic community is starting to think about that. There is a Black Reparations Fund now at the Denver Foundation. Until we can think about all the different ways that we can invest in communities that have been directly affected, impacted over generations by our historically oppressive systems, invest in those people as leaders and start to deal with this system that only can succeed if very wealthy people deign to give some of their surplus wealth to make it work. I don't think we're going to make much progress, any long-term progress. So the hope for the future is that the philanthropic world will start to come around to thinking about how it can can resolve some of these challenges and perhaps to put more of their dollars into addressing them and thinking about the sources of their own wealth.
Agree 100%. And I want to actually debunk the overhead myth. And I think it gets to how we pay individuals and how we support these organizations that have taken on the most immense challenge we have in our society. They are trying to solve the problems that no one has solved yet, whether it's structural racism, whether it's making sure everyone has access to healthcare, whether it's making sure no one is living in poverty. They're doing the hardest work, and they deserve to have, they deserve not to be starved for the resources they need to make progress on solving those goals. So I'd like to really debunk that overhead myth and think about funding these organizations commensurate with the challenges that they're facing.
That feels all very interconnected to me, and that was not planned. So I love this. Thank you so much to the three of you for giving us your time and sharing your thoughts and insights. It's been fun for me. I hope it's been fun for you all and those of you online. We will be bringing back our spring, our next spring, First Friday will start in February. So First Fridays, join us. We're going to continue the 50 years theme through probably about April. So we hope that you join us there. Give on Giving Tuesday.
Colorado Gives Day.
Colorado
Colorado Gives Day.
December 6th.
On Colorado.
You can
Gives
give
Day.
now.
And thanks everyone. We can stay in the room, you know, go shake Chef David's hand and eat some more and have a little more coffee. Network.